And we're going 5, 4, 3. All right, everybody. If it's Tuesday, that could mean only one thing, that it is time for Comic Book School Live, and I am excited to see you. And yes, I can actually see you directly through this webcam. It's not creepy in the least. Actually, my wife had said to me, at the beginning of every episode, you should say, like, if it's Tuesday, it can only mean it's time for Comic Book School. I'm like, you don't watch much, do you?
And
like, you say that all the time? And I'm like, every show. Every show. So...
She gave you a good idea.
She gave me a good idea. So, Mike, I'm wearing my spring green.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm feeling very festive. Do you feel the spring is in the air?
I feel allergic looking at your spring shirt.
Well, I'll take it. I'll take it. Behind me, she said my background is terrible. It looks like someone's going to creep up behind me.
Is it worse than mine?
It's actually better than yours. She looks like you're dialing in from prison off the payphone. Tonight, Mike, we have a pretty exciting guest. As always, we bring the best guests. Mm-hmm. We're going to be speaking with DG Chichester, who is a well-known, well-respected, and prolific writer who kind of disappeared there from comics for a while, went and had a real life, and now appears to be coming back to comics.
Wow.
So I'm pretty excited. This is, I know him from his second life, so I'm actually pretty excited because we crossed paths in our second lives. So what do you think, Mike? Should we bring him on?
I think you should bring him on.
I think we should bring him on. DG Chichester, welcome to the show.
Buddy, Mike, thank you guys for having me on. I want to say two things. A, I love your opening. I think it's just tremendously energetic, and B, I love your setup for me here. It feels like it's behind the music, kind of like at the pinnacle of his career, Chichester would dive into the depths of his soul. It has that lovely sort of like everything just like cracked apart. So thank you.
Yeah, Dan, you've had an amazing career everywhere you went. You've had an amazing career, and we're going to unpack that a little bit. How you broke into comics, what you did for 20 years, and then how you're coming back.
I love it. You're going to make me feel like I had a plan, Compared to me, the Joker did have a plan. Yes.
Okay, Mike, would you like to guess? So we know D stands for Dan. Mike, what does G stand for in DG Chichester?
Gorgeous.
Oh, well, let's get the freebie pack for Mike and just send it to him right now.
I thought it was going to be Golly, because I thought that would make a good middle name, Dan Golly Chichester.
That would be a good one. It's God, though. It really just goes straight for the top. It plays into the ego. The opportunities just write themselves. So that's really the pretentiousness of DG. You don't really need anything else with it.
And you call Dan whatever he wants because he's like 6'13", and so he just whatever. You're just like he's like, call me Dan. I'm like, all right.
It's all good. Next to my son, it's very small and tiny. So
all right. So it looks like Hat Month is over. That is correct. Last month was Hat Month, and we wore a hat every single month. This is the designer of the intro, Vince. Would you like to try and pronounce his last name, Dan?
Vatakunas?
Whatever it is, it's
fine. Awesome opening. Love it.
No one's ever.
That'll be his new name.
Oh, Aaron offers that your middle name is Damn Great Chichester.
And I'm liking that too. That is I'm going to use that. You can swap. I'm going to swap it out every time. That's beautiful. That's right.
And I'm not
It's
sure,
between that.
but Glenn
Yeah.
Gatilla added Dirt Biking God.
That's a testament to balance I do not have. But
you can always count on Glenn for something unique in the conversation. Thank you, Glenn, as always, for joining us. But Dan, we came prepared. Mike and I sweat for minutes on putting
many minutes.
Yeah, we went many minutes on putting some slides together. So I am going to pull up.
I'm glad I read up on my improv.
Minutes together. So Dan, you had a successful career, like a shooting star, and then disappeared.
And I burned out.
Then you disappeared and came back. But first, let's give a quick overview. Dan, you are a very prolific writer. Everywhere I looked, it looked like somewhere on the fandom site, it looked like you had written some 190 issues, or 190 had been credited to you. Maybe as writer and editor, or have you actually written 190 issues for Marvel?
I'll go with it. Sure. I mean, a lot of it's some extended runs on things, and then I certainly did a large number of single issue annuals and specials and that type of thing. So they add up. I don't know that I ever sat down and calculated it. Either didn't want to boost my ego or feel sad and pathetic one way or the other. But it was a good run. It was a very good run.
It's sad and pathetic how many times I calculate all of my credits and then talk about them at every chance I get. So I'm pretty self-involved. But Dan, you've written for multiple publishers, not just Marvel, but Marvel, DC, and other publishers as well. Like you were really out there as a writer. How did you get started in comic books? I believe you broke in as an editor.
I broke in as the assistant to Jim Shooter's assistant. So Jim Shooter was the famous editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics in the mid-'80s, responsible for many things, Secret Wars, many other things, controversial figure to some. But I was hired while I was still in college. I had run out of money. Saw an ad on the wall of the student employment office for a typist at Marvel Comics and thought to myself, geez, I read comics when I was a kid and really enjoyed them. I haven't read them in a long time. I type really fast because I was studying screenwriting. And boy, that sounds like a perfect place to go type. And went in, did not get that job. They had just handed it over to somebody else. It was in the foreign licensing department. But they said, well, you seem like you got your head in the right place. Little did they know. But they sent me downstairs. This was on the 11th floor. 10th floor was editorial. And sent me down and said, Lynn Cohen, who is technically Jim Shooter's executive assistant, is looking for an assistant. So Lynn looked at me and, I guess it didn't fall over, said, I'm overwhelmed, you're hired. And, and then I would intermittently work for them on and off because I was still in school. And then I did the unthinkable when the semester ran out. I left. No one leaves Marvel Comics willingly, but I had set up a job over the summer at home. And so I left. And but over the summer, Epic Comics, which was a division of Marvel Comics at that point, doing their more eclectic titles, their creator-owned titles, called and said, we are looking for an assistant, a real assistant editor. Are you interested? And I gave them the same shtick. I'm still in school. I have to balance things out, but I went on staff with them and ended up working directly for Archie Goodwin, which you can do a lot worse than learn with Archie Goodwin and Joe Duffy also. Margaret Clark was one of the other primary editors there, but and there could not have been a better comic book school to learn from in terms of individuals, and also because we were doing such eclectic, strange work. It was published by Marvel, but it was top creators doing their own thing. I ended up learning a sort of a different way of doing the craft.
Yeah, and editorial led to writing work. And
yes,
you then eventually were, just really. I loved your run on Daredevil. That was actually how I really discovered you. But then always saw your name popping up in comics, and you must have been conducting yourself well as a professional, because if you don't, you won't get work, and it looked like you were getting a lot of work.
I tried to conduct myself as a professional. I think over the years I've been more introspective in what I've done well and what I didn't do well. There were times when I fumbled badly, and I own that years later. You'd be late on something, and I shouldn't have been late on something, and that might have been the reason I didn't continue on something. That was one instance. That was on Nick Fury, a book I really enjoyed writing a lot, and a character I really enjoyed, but I was unconscionably late on the schedule, and that the editor was totally right in saying I have to let you go off the book. So that was a mistake I wouldn't make. Again, you sort of learn by doing or not doing in that case. But I generally look to try to do stories that I think were a little bit beyond, maybe sometimes a little bit beyond my abilities. But I tried to push things and try to keep good relationships with the folks that I met, casually or not. And a lot of the people that I ended up working with, early on would end up in other positions. So that was a good door opener. When Fabian, took over Acclaim or Valiant or whatever it was at that time, that wasn't a guaranteed job, but it was a nice in, to be able to say, hey, can we talk about something? So that would sometimes open things up. Dwayne McDuffie at Milestone, again, not an immediate door opener, but the fact we had been in school together and had known each other and worked together at Marvel, a way to sort of open the door at Milestone.
Now, Mike, Dan is well known for Daredevil. Did you ever tell Dan the Daredevil episode that you wrote for Robot Chicken?
Oh,
really? Oh,
Yeah.
God, I have to find this now. Awesome.
Yes, you'll have to find it. It's all about after Matt Murdock gets hit with the chemical truck and it gives him his Daredevil powers. A bunch of other people also get splashed with chemicals and they get superpowers as well, but all of their powers are ridiculous. So one of them loses his sense of humor, but he gains a fashion sense. So it's things like that, and it goes off the rails. But you can find that online.
I think that could have been a 10 issue run in What If. That would have been awesome. That would have been.
I think Mike, they should have hired you. Hey, it looks like Mariam's joined us. Happy Ramadan to you, Mariam. We're glad that you're able to join us during Ramadan. So. Dan, as we do This Is Your Life, I say that suddenly you appeared in different places. This is Dan's website, which you can find, you can see here is at capitalistfiction.com. And I was working in pharmaceutical marketing, and I kept hearing the name Dan Chichester. And I just couldn't help but think that maybe there was some sort of connection. And there was. And one day we had gotten together and I was like, are you DG Chichester? And he was like, I am. Just as a quick note, Mike, on the totem pole, I was like the dirt holding up the pole, and Dan was like way at the top of the pole with all the ornate designs. So Dan, multi-award winning, chief creative, chief digital, chief, always winning awards. And I was still typing for Marvel. So Dan, how did you make that transition from comics into marketing and advertising?
Like a lot of things, I was fortunate enough, I think, to fall upwards a little bit. I mean, comics did have a crashing period in the mid 90s. The industry kind of crashed in a lot of ways. A lot of stores closed. That means there's less opportunity for titles. Less opportunities for titles means less editors, less need for writers, artists. A lot of people maintained, that momentum, and kept trying to kind of knock at the door for various reasons, which we may or may not get into. I did not, but it sort of dovetailed with a burgeoning interest I had in the digital space, whatever the digital space meant in 1999. And I was doing outreach to try to find the next thing. I had sent myself to a lot of game shows, E3, saying, "Hey, I'd love to write some video games. I'd love to write some interactive things. It's probably 10 years too early for any of that kind of stuff." But one of these outreaches, which was probably had some listserv, somewhere, just text type of entry, got a call back from a woman named Audrey Fleischer, who was at that point a creative director at Saatchi, and she would later become a creative director at Ogilvy. And Audrey was intrigued by the comics background. She was looking for more eclectic people to bring in advertising, and kind of gave me a test run on a website for Lycra, which was sort of appropriate, right, in the superhero space, stretchy fabric.
And Mike is wearing Lycra right now, right?
Right, yes, it's fitting and it's fashionable on you, Mike. I must say, I knew nothing about websites, knew nothing about, in terms of creating them at that level, knew nothing about marketing or advertising. Did that for about a month, and then that was over, and I didn't think anything of it again. And then Audrey would call me about a year later, when she had taken over the IBM digital business, and wanted to know if I wanted to come in and work on a couple-week campaign for something, and it ended up being almost a 14-year run at Ogilvy the first time, before then moving to different agencies in one form or another. So it was not an intended career path, but it ended up being a great way to relearn certain skills, learn new skills, and I think really work on my discipline most of all, which I desperately needed.
Mike, Dan was known as the story guy at Ogilvy and would help advertising and marketing professionals to utilize story structure and storytelling techniques that he learned in comic books. And it was a great benefit to the agency, but also it was amazing how few people that were working in the advertising and marketing industry understood story. They would say, like, "Oh, we have to tell the brand story," and Dan would be like, "Do you know how to tell a story?" And then he would, "This is how one tells a story."
Yeah.
And he would run storytelling, I guess, workshops, Dan?
Yeah, we would try to infuse that, workshops, working into the brainstorming, working into the concepting. We did some of that together, Buddy. And I think it takes with the right people, and some people just, pretty quickly, I think, who's going to pick up on it or not. But it's easy to say the word story.
It's really easy. It's short. But I think one of the things that you were very good at was finding that story. Talk about what your experience as a comic book writer and as an editor looking at other writers' stories taught you about finding the story and finding if there's actually a story in there.
Well, I think, anybody who's listening, you guys, anybody who's interested in this and interested in the creative aspect of it. But I also think as readers, as fans, you intuitively know when something is working. You start to feel the beats of it, right? And when something's off, something is grating at you, and that's a trope, or that just kind of, hit the wrong way. And I think I came at it in the same way. Coming into comics professionally, I was coming into it as a reader and as a fan, and as a fan of movies as well. And in doing the creation of it, I knew when I was off, right? Those first few things that I wrote, where Mark Grunwald would school me on something and say, "Nice effort, kid." That's not going to work.
Do it again.
Good job. Do it again. You start to learn, what do you think is right, and then not what's wrong about it, but how do you improve upon it? And that's where you start to feel that those beats in the same way, and that you're kind of in the groove. You're in that flow. And I think that if you are open to that, that's where you sort of learn how to continue that, continue to want to feel that flow, and then have the discipline to course correct when it's not right. It's very easy to want to just kind of keep moving forward, or just say that's good enough. And that's what I think I took, especially from as I got better at comics, especially as I got better at writing. I started as an editor. Starting as an editor, I worked with extraordinary people, right? I was working with Pat Mills. I was working with Mark Evanier. I was working with Mark DeMattis, Kent Williams, Bill Sienkiewicz. And these people taught me by the weight of their talent what was great. And I think I was a really good editor for them. Right. I could self-identify. I know what you're trying to aim for. And because you told me, and I think you're off by 10 degrees. I think you're off by 30 degrees. I could course correct. And for a very, very long time, I was convinced I was a far, far better editor than I was a writer. And I was probably right, because I could identify those things in others and help them get to where they needed to be. So I think that sense of story is what allowed me then to use that same lens on myself and course correct harshly myself as a writer. And then I would take the same thing over to working within advertising and working with creative teams and strategy teams and anything else, and say in the same way, what is a creative brief, right? In advertising, it's the guidepost for what we want to do. It's what we want to achieve. If a creator at Epic Comics told me, I want this book to be about X, I want it to evoke these themes, then I could say to Mark DeMattis, Mark would look at me from below these black sunglasses and scare the hell out of me. What do you know anyway? But I would say, if you're trying to achieve this, I don't think you're quite there yet. And then I would be able to take that same sense of guidance into the world of advertising. What are we trying to achieve from the creative brief, and how do I use those same sensibilities to ask people, what are the beats? What is the story that we're trying to tell here for a client or for an audience or for a customer or whatever?
Dan, all of our viewers are aspiring creators or creators looking to get to their next level. But I would say the majority of them still maintain some sort of day job or at least freelance work. Any tips for the comic creators who are listening and how they can bring their comic book skills into the office and into the workplace, even if they haven't achieved the level of notoriety that you did as a writer? What can they bring as visual storytellers?
It's a great question. I think you're in a much better place nowadays to be able to bring your enthusiasm and your passion, your fandom, for comics into a workplace, right? Before it was sort of like, what is that? Now it's all over the place. The pop culturism of it allows you to kind of maybe bring in certain things that evoke that part of yourself to your coworkers. So even if you're not in a field or a workplace that maybe immediately says, I can create things here. We were in a workplace, Buddy, that allowed us to still speak creative within the world of advertising. Maybe some folks don't have that advantage, but if they had the ability to, showcase certain aspects of themselves, I think that creates a nice kind of cross-fertilization. I read something a while back, where one of the bad things, the demeaning things about working in certain office things, where you cut so much of yourself off, where you spent the majority of your time, right? If I want to do a radio show, or I'm a ballet dancer or something like that, I may be spending 8 to 10 hours of my day among people who don't know anything about this part of myself. So if you can bring some aspect of that passion that you have for creativity and storytelling, and maybe that starts with a little poster or a poem or something you've written that you've kind of tacked up in your cubicle or your office, I think other people will then respond to that naturally. And then that begins a discussion, right? Begins a discussion about something that you would suddenly find out, wow, I didn't even know we had this. One of my best friends in high school, and he was the jock, kind of our clique. And I didn't learn that this guy loved comics until we almost graduated. And it was this weird thing. We just never talked about it. And I just wonder, we were very good friends. I just wonder like what additionally we could have bonded on if we had ever kind of broken that barrier. But I was sort of like, nobody else reads comics as far as I know. I'm not going to really talk about the fact I've got all my clothes on the floor and my dresser drawers are just filled with all my comic books, so.
Mike, you were you known as the athlete in your group? Because I know I certainly wasn't.
Yeah. Captain of the football team. That was me.
There you go.
Except it was that football thing that you turned on and the figures just vibrated.
Yeah.
Right.
Mike,
one other thing I'll just throw in there, buddy, just for the folks you're asking that question about is also, what are the things people can raise your hands on in your workplace, where you can do something creative, where something, what's the theme for the holiday party? What's the theme for this? What's the thing that needs to be written? Is there a new newsletter? Hey, the CEO wants to do a podcast. Be the one to raise your hand and create in that instance as well.
I think it's a great icebreaker at a very minimum. I think, and I would imagine, Mike, when you are talking with producers and say that you worked in comics, there's probably a few people who like sit up and they're like, "Oh, tell me about that."
Yeah, you can see the nerd twinkle in their eye when they're like, "Oh, I used to work at Wizard, and they had that magazine and they loved it." And then it kind of starts a whole new snowball of the conversation because they know that you came from the same world they did.
Totally.
And Dan, I think that, in our world, I kept the fact that I had a background in comics secret for a very long time. And a well-known industry person said that, if you're trying to fit in and be like every other marketer or advertiser, you're probably not going to get as far as you want. I didn't have an advanced degree. I didn't have any particular pedigree. But he pointed out, he goes, you're one of very few people who've actually written comics for Marvel Comics. And this was kind of pre-cool Marvel Comics, way before the movies. So I kind of presented that part of myself, and people were very receptive.
I was the same way, buddy. I mean, I came when I stopped working in comics, really, and did a hard break, which was a conscious, stupid choice. But and then as I felt I was leaning into the advertising work that was picking up, and I felt, and this was occupying my time. It wasn't, I had to be, Uber advertiser, but I was there till 8, 9 o'clock at night, and rinse, repeat, and I sort of felt like, well, if I'm doing this now, I need to lean into this, and I need to be like these other people. And I really didn't talk it up at all. People would occasionally make a connection, or somebody would bring up something, but I would not play it up until I had that same kind of epiphany, more on my own than maybe somebody saying it to you as they did. But it's, we're not quite astronauts. It's not like, oh, there's only 49 people that have ever been, around, but there's only a, relatively still small handful of people when you put it statistically, who can say they've worked in comics on major properties, and it's a nice icebreaker, and it's a nice accomplishment.
So, Mike, you're going to use that as an icebreaker going forward.
From now on, yeah. Hey, my name's Mike. I used to read comics.
There you go.
That's all. See what happens from there.
So, who knows? Now, Mike, the thing about Dan was he was kind of a big deal, and
still is.
He still is a big deal to me. He is. But at some
thank you for putting that qualification.
At some point, he started to pivot back to comics. And Dan, I'm sorry, I thought I had more screenshots, but as usual, I'm ill prepared for the show and life in general. I thought I had a few more screenshots, but the key thing is you are starting to ease your way back into comics. And some of the people who might be watching the show might be fellow professionals who haven't done comics in a while and are probably thinking, I'm too old, or no one will remember me. Well, they'll talk like this. I'm too old for this.
Suddenly, yes. The voice.
They got a cigar in their So again, as you're coming back from your hiatus, what's going through your mind? What's your approach? What's your strategy? And I think, for other pros who are thinking about it, what are the dead end alleys that you've already discovered?
I think the biggest thing going through my mind is, and I think this is always the case in creative work where you've maybe hamstrung yourself a little bit, is what took me so long, to lean into this, and the excuses that you make of I'm too busy, or I've got this going on, or who's going to read it, or who's going to look at it. These are all non-starters. These are, the famous book, The War on Art. If you guys are familiar with that one of my favorite books. That is the author, Stephen. This is another reason. But Pressfield, I think his name is. But that there's this voice on your shoulder, really just telling you all the reasons why something won't work and why you shouldn't do it. And to be able to quiet that or shout that down is the primary thing. And I think it's very easy to listen to that voice at whatever age and whatever stage you're at. So overcoming that was a big thing for me. And just to embrace the enthusiasm of telling a story, and telling a story with collaborators is a lot of fun. The energy of it is probably the biggest kick of it. Not that, oh, I'm going to make X amount of money out of this, or geez, I hope, somebody finally recognizes me again, or responds to me in this different way. It's simply the exercise of creativity, especially creativity with other people, that I think is a huge kick for me. And I think finding collaborators, we talked about this, I think, before the show began, in the sense of getting back into an office, right? Or getting back, and seeing people. I think that collaborators push you, right? They trigger certain things in you. And that is one of the positives of comics that is sometimes overlooked, that can be an instigator for getting yourself going. And that's what I have found. And finding the honesty of working with those collaborators. Sometimes one of the projects I'm working on now, which will probably be a Kickstarter project, working with the artist on that, certain things took a long time to get to a certain stage. And one particular set of pages, this artist kept putting off for one reason or another, to when he finally got to it, his big double page spread. It's supposed to be, fairly big reveal for the story, came back very weak in comparison to all the other work that had been done, because I think he had put it off for so long that it had become an albatross as opposed to the enjoyment, right? The reason we structured it this way was you're going to open this double page spread and you're going to let this off the leash, right? This is where you're going to let all your skills and all your passion kind of go. And in this instance, this is where the honesty of collaboration, was empowering to him, I think, because I was able to say, this isn't working. Whereas he might have been able to, say, I just want this done with, right? I just want this done. I don't want to think about this anymore. And that's it. And in the same way, I like to be receptive to that as well, where I can turn something over to people that will judge me harshly and honestly, and get back the energy from that. Now it can undercut you badly if you really trust a person and then they say something negative to you. But I think that collaboration is something that folks should look for, to encourage them to push forward with the work that they want to do.
Well, and I think one of the areas, and I don't want to speak on your behalf, but I might as well.
Please.
I think you started by kind of dipping your toe in the water with your Substack newsletter.
Yes, I talked to you about that early on.
Yeah, how that helped to ease you into whatever you were going to do. You want to just talk about that? Because I remember you starting it.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, this is kind of a good idea.
Thank you for bringing that up, buddy, because I think that's an excellent example, because it took me forever to hit publish on that, because I hadn't hit publish on anything in a long time. I mean, I had done things for, right, this multi-million-dollar campaigns. I had presented to CEOs of multi-million-dollar companies. I had run, big teams at big, agencies. I wasn't known as a shy person, right, necessarily. But to hit publish on this Got City newsletter, Got City is a technical term, of course, was boy, it took everything to hit that in that first thing. You know, I wrote it, I rewrote it, I laid it out, I did this, I ran it past you, or I ran it past other people. How is this? Is this going to work? What do you guys think? But just finally doing it and not worrying any more about it was, I think, very freeing to then be able to open up to doing more. You know, done is the engine of more, is I think a Brie Pellis thing. I'll rip it off from him, guy who invented the original 3D printer MakerBot. But you know, when you do things, it instigates you doing more things, and that is, I think, something very necessary for me, and I think for other folks, because you can over analyze the thing in front of you to such an nth degree, you never get it done. You never get that done. You never get the next thing done.
Well, you know, when we started even just this show, it was a springboard off of a show that Mike and I had done prior to me even joining Wizard. It was called Comics Vision. And then when we started this, we were so stiff in the beginning, and then just decided, all right, let's just be sloppy. And, you know, 2 years later, you know, once you get that momentum, but if you don't get your momentum started, I think it's really hard. Sometimes you just have to be sloppy and get started and accept the fact that it's imperfect. Mike, you write opposite than me. You actually just start with fade in and you begin writing, right? Like I
just jump right in. Yeah.
Right. You just start sloppy.
Yeah. Sloppy's everything about me. That's
how do you write, Dan? Do you outline, or do you just start writing?
I generally just start. I write, especially in comics, in fragments. You know, I love little notebooks and like long, legal, pads, and I just kind of go down and I just have these fragments in mind. You know, it'll be an emotion, it'll be a scene. You know, I'll write door, kick, and and hope I remember what that means later. And then I start to kind of feel there's an assembly to it. And then we'll start to kind of cross things out and work them back again and again and again. And very often what I find is the saturation of that, just becomes a moment in time where a lot of things will rush in, and a bigger idea and sort of a bigger structure will come of that unconsciously. Maybe not in the moment, but maybe the next time I sit down or taking a walk or something like that. So it's capturing those fragments that really ultimately then becomes something that I can work off of in a much more detailed way.
Dan, once you turn that spigot back on, making comics, did you find that the ideas were flowing faster?
I never had any shortage of ideas, Buddy. But I don't think I channeled them. I mean, I didn't channel them anywhere. I went out to lunch with Fabian, not too long ago, and I'd been in touch with Fabian, but we didn't really talk about comics in a long while, and he was like, he basically said, "What happened to you? Like, you just didn't write. You didn't write anything for all this time." and in a lot of ways, that's true. I mean, I wrote however many, hundreds of pieces of marketing material, but in terms of this type of work, no. But it doesn't mean I had a shortage of ideas, but I just didn't direct myself to put them down. So now that I'm doing it, I don't find that, suddenly there's a rush of things necessarily, because I don't think there was a lack of ideas. But what I do find is that when I do work on things, the structure and discipline of all those years of doing the other stuff, I think, is providing for a much stronger, material, much more thought through material, sometimes more thoughtful material. This project I was talking about before, this thing I'm doing with this artist, Carl Waller, which is actually an idea that we had many, many years ago, really before it kind of went on my hiatus in some ways. I think if we had done it then, it would have been a very 90s story with a lot of 90s explosions and, Steven Seagal-ish moments. when Steven Seagal was somebody you actually would name check in a
I
goodish way.
I like Steven Seagal and explosions. I feel like that's
but now the rhythms of it are different, and I like that a lot. That I'm kind of willing to follow the path of it and have it be something that I feel like I'm trying to keep up with it versus trying to force story beats into it.
Mike, do you ever run out of ideas, or is the spigot always running?
Oh, I run out of ideas all the time. I've spent many days just staring at this computer going, I'll think of something the next hour or so. And
right.
What happened?
Next thing you know, it's Friday and I haven't done anything.
All right, Dan, one question that we ask every one of our guests when they come on.
Yes.
What is one piece of advice you wish you had received earlier in your career?
That's a great question. I think it goes back to that idea of shouting down, of bewaring that voice and shouting it down as quickly as possible. That negative, voice, because it's very, it derails you. It takes you off your game, and it never stops. Right? It's always there to sort of work against you, even in your times of best success, and when you're feeling like, I'm hitting on all cylinders here, and then you wake up and you look at somebody's Facebook post, it looks like they're having a much more fabulous life than you could ever possibly have, and you feel like you're not doing anything. So I would say, just be aware of what that's doing to you, and be the stronger entity in shouting it down and focusing on your creativity.
I like that. It's very that's very inspiring, isn't it, Mike? Yeah. Mike is also inspiring, Dan. Mike has something special every episode where he leads us into a bit of trivia, and that trivia has been carefully selected, curated, and seasoned by Mike to give us a delectable treat of trivia that can be used by creators.
Yes, usually chosen 5 minutes before the show airs.
5 or 10. This time it was a full 10 minutes. I had time to find a picture of Mel's hole. Mike,
nice.
Tell us about Mel's hole.
Mel's hole is a very interesting. They don't know if it's an urban legend or whatever, but this guy named Mel, he owned a piece of property in Washington, and in his backyard was this hole. And he lived there for years, and he just dumped everything he could into the hole. His neighbors would come over and throw whatever. He couldn't ever figure out how deep it was. There was one of his neighbors said that, his dog died, so he threw the body into the hole. And a few days later, the dog appeared again, but didn't seem to know who the owner was. And eventually, he talked about this on a show called Coast to Coast. And from what he tells everybody, the government came and basically kicked him off his own property because they were very curious about what this hole was, how deep it went, where it led to, what's going on. So as a kickoff to, somebody thinking about a good story, what is Mel's hole? Where does it go? What comes out of it? What goes into it?
I think they had said at some point they measured it down to 80,000 feet, and it still had not hit the bottom. 80,000
some of the measurements, I'm like, he took the story a little too far in that respect. But, it's a great idea for, an opening to, a good story.
One of the things that bothers me is this photograph. Now, you have a bottomless pit. Could they have put a better fence up?
Well, this is a picture they took later after the government had supposedly shut it all down and taken it over and then left. It was just a hole, and it had like a concrete barrier around it. And then for years, once the government had taken it over, it was like off maps. No one could ever find it. They say that there were some people that went up to find it and they were never seen again. Maybe they got thrown into the hole.
It's very easy to see why they'd never be seen again.
Yeah. They're still dropping.
And You get a story, and they say the prompt is Mel's Hole, which I just feel is an awkward name.
It is a little bit.
Keep an eye on us from another dimension somehow. So Aaron thinks that this is tied into Cthulhu. Dan,
could very well be.
Where do I think it's tied into, or what's the prompt?
Tell me what you think. Mike pitches us a delectable piece of trivia for us as creators.
Wow. I mean, when you said the thing about the dog, my first thought was, I was going to make a Pet Cemetery, joke, but I do like the idea of that it sort of is this, pathway to some kind of reincarnation or something, that it's actually, but not just necessarily you throw that dog in and you get that dog back, or you get back in the twisty little Stephen King version of it. But, maybe it's just this collection, a mechanism of all the things that go in the hole, and it what re-enters out after a certain amount of time is, an amalgam, of all the things that have gone down there, all the dogs and all the people, and all the rocks and, and other strange things. Sort of like a mix master.
Glenn Gatilla asks, what if someone peed into it? Sorry, that was infantile.
I'm sure
it was infantile, me showing that, even though I was
calling it Mel's Hole for this long. That was, yes, having that just on screen for all this time. Yes.
All right, Mike, what do you get? Do you have a story that uses Mel's Hole in some way?
That for me?
Yeah, you're Mike, right?
Yeah, I didn't hear what you said about the beginning. Right now, nothing. I mean, I kind of like to imagine as a funny, like, Robot Chicken sketch where you finally go down to the bottom of the hole and it's in some person's house and they just keep getting garbage dumped on them. So everything
it's like the Pokemon ball ones. What's inside the Pokeball, right?
Yeah, just ends up there. Yeah.
But isn't this a great example? I think it is, of, you were talking about just creativity for folks before. It's the ability to sort of see things like this and have the mindset. This is the prompt, right? These are the things that are around us all the time. Maybe not the bottomless pit, but, these weird little things that if you take the time and you take your notebook with you, I love little field books, those little tiny little notebooks. I just stick them in my back pocket and carry it around. And, you see these elements, and these are always jumping off points, which a lot of folks don't look at. And that is the kind of, what's that about? Well, maybe that your mind doesn't tell you right away what it is, but, a week later, it might start to say things to you. I can't tell you the number of times we've been driving around, and I'm always on, it seems like it's driving, and I'll tell my wife to write something down, and she'll like, I have no idea why are you saying those words? And it's because I saw something. I saw a light glinting off a tombstone on a hill. And, I'll say, write down graveyard for hire or something like that, because I've got, a bunch of things, but I have no time to write it down. So hopefully I remember what that means a week later when I see it.
I do the same thing with my wife. Sometimes we're just home and I'll just say, write this down. Like
yes. Yeah. That works out really well for you, does it?
Write this down.
With a cigar.
You have my greatest
to tuna. Yeah. It's
because that's how they talked in the 50s. Take this down. So take a note.
So true.
Type this up and send it out. Send that to legal. So I think clearly, I think obviously hellhole is Mel's Hole. I think this is clearly a portal to hell. I think no one wants to admit it, even on this show, that we all know that this is truly the path to hell.
Yep.
And you go down there and you will find archangels who've become devils. That's it. I mean, there's nothing else. I don't know why you guys just didn't take an easy one.
Even Satan doesn't want to admit this is hell's hole. That's why, it's like, look how shabbily I'm being treated.
Look at that fence. That's terrible.
Exactly.
That guy's like, this thing drops to a bottomless pit. Let's put 2 rows of barbed wire.
One trip to Spirit Halloween would have looked better around that thing,
Right, like paddles falling down there. They're like, So I'm not pleased about the Mel hole, which is obviously the hell hole. And then Glenn said maybe a monster comes out of it looking to find out who did it. Oh, who peed earlier? There's
peed in the hole. Yeah,
peed in the hole. Dan, we're about to go. Where can people find you, follow you, and otherwise just send you their money?
Oh, wow. Not asking for money yet, but maybe soon. But I think the best place is, thank you for showing the website before. That is capitalistfiction.com, but I would say that's primarily, an informational just portfolio, mostly for marketing type things. But my newsletter continues. I got to catch up with it, but it's storymaze.substack.com. I think Substack is still in business. Although there were some strange articles this morning. Always on your platforms, kids. But that's where I'm keeping things most active in terms of new fiction, new ideas, essays, and will be a central place where I'll be putting out information as some of these new comics and things start to pick up steam. I'm on Twitter at DG Chichester. For as long as Twitter's around, and seem to have signed up for all these strange services that are doubtful for their future. But those are probably two of the best places to kind of keep up with me.
And for those of you who were not able to order somebody to write that down, don't worry. We've included this in the show notes. You'll be able to find all the places. DG.
I should have said, write this down first.
Yes.
Write this down, kids.
Write this down, people.
Make some notes.
Mm-hmm.
So Dan, we're going to put you back into the green room. Don't do anything weird, because sometimes we'll pull you right back in.
Can I have the chips there?
You can eat the chips, but you never know when you get popped back in. So thank you for joining us, Dan.
All right, back to the green room. Going
back to the green room. That was interesting, huh, Mike?
It was, yeah, very interesting. That's a good career he's had.
Yeah, he was kind of the big boss, and thank God we were bound by comics, because I think he could beat me up.
Well,
I'm pretty sure everybody can. Dan, in a fight, who'd win, you or me?
Oh, you definitely, buddy.
Yeah.
I put all. Yeah, it's there's no doubt in my mind.
He's just being nice.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, I can't. He's a big guy, but seriously though, he was really the storytelling guy. If they were like, we need to talk about storytelling with our client, they were like, Dan Chichester, that's our man. So they would deploy him to different places where stories needed to be told, and I didn't get to go. So you got to go to all the cool places.
You couldn't just tag along with him?
No. Dan, did you go to the cool places you like, with South by Southwest and
but
and I don't know what Haight-Ashbury?
I sent myself to those places, buddy. They didn't know what I was doing half the time. I just sent myself.
It's good to be the boss. It's good to be the boss. I was busy down in Mel's Hole, Mike.
Yes.
I was spending a lot of time in Mel's Hole. All right, Mike, we still don't have a proper end for the show, so we're just going to show everybody the most important thing that they need to know, which is, where is it? Oh, no, wait, hold on. We have to show them the really
the right button.
thing. Hold on, hit the correct button. Correct button is like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to come back. We will see you next Tuesday. We hope you enjoyed the show. We're always happy to see you all. Good night, everybody.